Either by accident or intention, you are listening to the Casting Shadows podcast. In this episode, we'll be talking about 3 favorite systems. Now, those people who are familiar with me and with the written blog and this podcast and YouTube and all that stuff will probably be surprised that I have this as a topic. And you can blame the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. I find that often in gamer conversation, wherever it might happen, opinions on a game become part of the context of that conversation. It's like we can't just talk about a game without also sharing our preferences about games, our bias about that game, and that sort of thing. It's almost a part of gamer culture. Our likes and our dislikes all get entangled, sometimes meaningfully, sometimes not, in whatever the topic happens to be. And there can be a lot to like or dislike in a given game, and in how that game is presented to us, or in how a given group that we're involved in is currently playing it. And depending on who is in the conversation, things can get convoluted and unclear as terms and intentions for terms drift, and as people struggle with getting their ideas out, ideas that haven't fully formed yet, or feelings about the game that they're just now realizing that they have because they're having this opportunity for this conversation. People might accidentally get involved in circular arguments and wind up stating that they like the game because they like the game, or because it's good, or they can find themselves, unintentionally joining a bandwagon they might not even know exists and just repeating what others have said about the game. Repeating words and phrases or catchphrases that might not mean what they think it means, or might not actually reflect the opinion that they have, and then they wind up extending the conversation, struggling for what it is that they want to say, and making it harder and harder for their listener to connect because they're doing the exact same thing back. Polls and surveys regularly flood social media to get people to weigh in on a favorite game. What are your 5 favorite games? What are the top 5 games? What's the best game for newcomers? What's the best game ever? And stuff like this. Best game for fantasy. And somehow, despite all the excitement and energy, through a general lack of specificity or planning this supposedly fun diversion, these questions can often feed this cycle of incoherent interaction and inadvertently help perpetuate these cycles and this confusion. So for me, over time, such things grew less and less fun for me to participate in, or even read or listen to, as the effort of sifting through the entries was so often greater than the potential reward of making an exciting discovery to be told about a cool new game to try. The signal-to-noise ratio was so much more toward noise. Recently, however, a contest for charity from Jason of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast has hit all the right notes for me to consider the question and participation in the question again. Jason asked specifically for 3 systems, not game titles, but systems, that his listeners favor, with a reason to support why it has become a favorite based on actually playing it. So this version of the classic poll question is a complete win for me, and I'll repeat the details about the contest at the end, or just directly go there now and listen to him talk about it and become a part of it. Okay, the short version of my response for the busy gamer on the go is something like this. Here's the question: what are the top 3 favorite RPG systems you've played and why? Well, let's open up with Fantasy Flight Games' Star Wars. When considered as a distinct implementation of what is later going to become Genesis, the FFG Star Wars system is a cunning collaborator in a Star Wars role-playing game. It's, I find, ideal for new GMs just learning to run games, and it's ideal for experienced GMs who enjoy being a vital part of a vibrant and thrilling role-playing experience that can really benefit from their experience, their descriptive ability, and their improvisational skill. And as a bonus, the system gets everyone involved in the description as a part of play. As a text, the books offer clear advice and support on using the system. The system has 3 core settings, which reflect the major focus, I think, of the original trilogy, from the point of view of stripping it out of the films and putting it into a role-playing game where your characters are the important ones. My second choice is the Ubiquity role-playing system. And this system is very flexible, but it's not generic. So it has a low page count, and it has quickly assimilated patterns that I find speed both learning the system and playing with it. It is fast to run, and it has meaningful options for players to explore. And these meaningful options develop over time, giving the game a lot of long-term enjoyment for long-term play. Plus, it has what I find to be a very satisfying read-to-use ratio that leaves little to no irrelevant material cluttering up my memory. It's geared for the specific feel of pulp heroics and has advice and procedures that help the group bring that feel to their game. So examples of games using the system are the original Hollow Earth Expedition, Leagues of Adventure, and the cosmic horror in a shotguns versus Shoggoths vibe of Quantum Black. There are other games, but this is the quick response. The final game, or the final system, that I will talk about in this short version is Mythras. The system is a generic toolkit, and so it carries the expectation that it should be able to handle anything a group wants to use it for. Well, Mythras exceeds that expectation. Mythras is the descendant and direct beneficiary of all the fantastic innovation that started with the very first RuneQuest, and which developed with RuneQuest and branched off into all the D100 games supported by basic role-playing, Call of Cthulhu being the best known, but certainly not the only one of those. It has added to what has gone before, not just collected it. And it continues to evolve with gaming. It's interestingly positioned in that it's a simple game to use, but has tremendous depth. It's intended to be read and to have its parts selected for use or set aside for some other game in some future time. Each section of the book gives insight into what its rules are for, why they exist, and how they can be used. Settings available for Mythras include Mythic Earth, like Mythic Britain and Mythic Rome and Mythic Constantinople, Lyonesse for fans of Jack Vance, Luther Arkwright, phenomenal creation inspired by Michael Moorcock's Champion Eternal, and Worlds United, a fantastically fun science fiction in a 1950s kind of vibe setting. Okay, that's the too long, don't have time to listen version. All right, the longer version. If the short version was enough, stop now. The only thing you're going to hear at the end are the contest details, which you can get just by going to the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. You don't need me to tell you those. And the station identification nonsense, which, because you're listening to this, you already know. So go ahead, eject. It's fine. So, the longer version. I read a lot of games, and I like a lot of games that I read in whole or in part. And it's a key part of my process of getting a new game to the table to look at its elements separately and together. Things like its setting, its system, and how those things are united in and by play. A game is obviously more than the sum of its parts, but I think it's important to recognize the influence of each part that exists within the text, and also recognize the influence of the people you play the game with and the environment in which you play the game and the fun that you have with it as you form your overall impression of a game. Often our feelings about a game, I feel, are not entirely just about one of those elements. When asked about my favorite games, I find that my list is too long and the contexts are too specific for the question to be answerable in any useful way or be something that a listener would want to listen to. But for this contest, the focus is on system only, and that is something that I can do. So to answer the question for myself, and to limit the response to 3 systems without anything like an honorable mention or qualifiers or categories of answer, I decided to add a further filter, that of how the games were designed. So my 3 choices, which we've already gone through earlier in the short version, include one designed for a specific setting and genre, one designed for a variety of settings in a specific genre, and one designed to be a toolkit. One of my choices is relatively light, one is moderate, and one at least appears to be heavy, but your mileage may vary on that. This weight of system varies between the games from effort required before play to effort required in play. And I recognize that a newcomer to these games, or a newcomer to gaming in general, may handle that weight differently than I do, or perceive it differently than I do. Whereas I see that the workload of using a system like Mithras is something that comes before play, not during play. Or when I look at a game like Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars and see it as being moderate in weight, whereas I see Ubiquity as being somewhat light in weight, I understand that this is truly a personal experience. And it's an experience that changes over time. As your familiarity with a system grows, so too does your perception of the effort required diminish. So that perception of weight or effort has changed for me as well as I have grown in experience with each of these systems. And now that I have years of play behind me with each of them, returning to them quickly for a few sessions is easy. And being in the flow of regular play is very comfortable, maybe to the point of being intuitive. I'm no longer thinking about the system. This is what people refer to when they say the system gets out of the way. Well, it's getting out of the way for you, or it has informed you of what the way is. So your instincts or your rulings or your application of the rules are in harmony with it. It's not out of your way. It's actually supporting you. It is the river on which the boat of your game sails. These systems are ones that I understand on a deep level. And I like them to the point of preferring them to other similar options. And they're games that I have used a lot and used in a lot of different campaigns with a lot of different people. So they make up a large part of my last decade of gaming. Because of this, I was able to choose them. They stand out These three systems stand out because they demonstrate the types of system choices I tend to make. And they demonstrate the type of settings that I enjoy and the people that are available for me to game with and the types of settings that we enjoy together and the types of results that we enjoy that these systems deliver. Further, these games were well written, and they were well written by people who enjoyed the source material greatly and wanted to share it with everyone who wants to play, regardless of level of experience. They didn't want to talk down to the newcomer. They wanted to excite and inspire the newcomer, and they wanted to incite and inspire and support the experienced gamer who gets it already, right? They wanted to share it with everyone who wants to play. And there are far more games that I'd love to share in this post, and there are games that I'd love to play more often than I do. And maybe some of those games, in the right circumstances, could give me experience as great as my three choices have. But at this stage, I'm beginning to doubt that they could do so as consistently and with as broad a range of people and settings and experience levels. So, for Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars, the specifics of the system I'm going to boil down to this. The system uses pools of specialized dice. This is not always a popular option, but the dice are readily available in the popular starter sets for the game, and they're available in separate packs, and they're available as part of a dice app. That dice app includes all the dice for all the games for Star Wars, whether they're Armada or whatever. The dice are of different types. Some of the dice determine success or failure, while others determine fortune, the flow of good or ill fortune. The system has a fairly stable and pulp heroics-oriented output of potential success, which over time, as players get used to their characters, they can begin to not predict, but at least try to rely on. And this is all flavored by outputs from the other dice that influence outcomes on a dramatic level. You succeeded, but there is a complication, or there is something far beyond a complication. It's potential to cause despair or the feeling of triumph. And resolution of what the output of the dice means is intended to be cooperative and inclusive of each player at the table and targeted directly at imagination and improvisation. It can be really exciting, almost intoxicating. And this, I find, contributes to the building of Star Wars-related friendships and the confidence of sharing the GM role among the members of the group. Everybody's involved in the outcome of all the roles, and so the idea that, well, I could never be a game master really starts to seem as unfounded as it should, right? In every part of this game, we're all, in a sense, contributing to being the GM. So this I kind of like, because my culture of play growing up was always that we all rotated who was the game master. On any given day, it could be any one of the group. And so the notion of now where there's a permanent game master still strikes me as odd. So a game like this, which encourages people to recognize that they have it within them to be the game master, I think is really valuable. The game is very well written and very well organized, making it a helpful first game experience that gives lots of guidance for helping to bring out the Star Wars feel using the system. Even better, it's one of those games which is well placed to help bridge the sensibilities in a group that might have some players that lean toward older games and some players that lean toward newer games. And so it helps each side see the fun and utility of the other. And together, they are providing the experience and they're providing the enjoyment that helps make the entire experience fun. Character creation is a quick point-buy process using a small number of points to adjust a one-page species and career template. The game has a lot of tactical options, as well as robust social interaction options. And player choices will really directly affect how lethal or how difficult the game can become. Characters definitely start out as competent, but they definitely start out as being in the lower tier of ability in the Star Wars galaxy. But the game can progress for a very, very long time and has a very high tolerance for character improvement. And so players can experience tremendous variety in campaigns. Who would choose this game? Well, you would choose this game if you want to play Star Wars. If you're curious about hearing more about the system or seeing it in play, I have playlists on my YouTube channel, which I'll put the links for in the show notes. The second system in my lists, the list is not ordered by preference, but by proximity from specific system designed for a specific setting, right? So we're now moving into the Ubiquity role-playing system. This system uses dice pools, and each die in the die pool is a 50-50 chance of success or failure, which means that you don't have a 50-50 chance of succeeding or failing on a roll, but you have the opportunity to predict with a certain degree of certainty whether or not your pool has enough dice in it to guarantee the minimum number of successes that are required for you to accomplish a given task. So this allows rolls to be skipped entirely. You can just take the average. You can say, I'm good enough to do that, and not roll, which helps build that sense of competence in a character, which is important for pulp heroics. But more importantly, it enables the player to quickly assess the risk of a given roll with a fun amount of uncertainty. There are times when the dice should give you the expected number of results, but give you no results whatsoever, or give you a tidal wave of success. So this helps players to, it helps them and it goads them to figure out what they might have to do to improve their odds. And I found that with experienced players in the system, this generally leads folks to interact with each other more in character and interact more with the environment. The game uses any even-sided dice. It doesn't matter what they are. You can be rolling a whole bunch of mismatched polyhedrals, or you can be rolling a fistful of D20s or D4s, or whatever turns your crank, as long as they are even-sided. All right. So before the days of DCC dice, you didn't have to say that they needed to be even-sided, but now you do. So any even-sided dice can be rolled. No special dice are needed to play. Character creation is a straightforward allocation of a small number of points on a single-page character sheet, attributes, and a small number of skills. It includes an archetype and a motivation to help launch the character toward who the player wants them to be, and help frame and reframe who the character ends up being in play. The game has a level of tactical choice that I find satisfying, and that I also find grows along with player knowledge of the system and whatever setting you're using it in. The biggest obstacle to learning the game really is not the system, but rather how the players understand how the characters fit in the spectrum of threats and perils that await them. When you tell someone they're playing a pulp heroics game, it's difficult to interpret how they are interpreting what you have told them. Are the characters going to be heroic because they are daring death with each encounter, or are they heroic because they can do things that most others can't? In other words, are they super heroic? Depending on how the game is played, that answer will be found. And the game itself guides you toward the level of lethality or super heroism that you want. Talking about expectations beforehand, both for what the setting you're using requires and what the players desire, is essential, and that should come as a surprise to no experienced players. So you choose Ubiquity if you like dynamic characters that are more than what they appear on the character sheet. You choose Ubiquity if you like Indiana Jones or Lara Croft, if you like Tintin or the works of Jules Verne, if you like Frankenstein or The Invisible Man, if you like any of the versions of Buck Rogers, if you like The Shadow and Doc Savage, if you like one or both of Millennium and The X-Files, or if you grew up reading The Hardy Boys, The Three Investigators, or Nancy Drew. Examples of the system in action can be seen again on my YouTube channel, and links will be provided in the show notes, including an overview of the system itself in a certain amount of detail. All right, the last choice, Mythras. This has gone fully now toward a generic system. This system relies on percentile dice. You roll D100 for the resolution of skill rolls or attribute checks and that sort of thing. But the system includes other dice, such as a D20 to identify hit location, and other dice for things like varying weapon damage and other effects. Characters can either be rolled randomly or built using points, and attention is paid both to the background of the character in terms of life events, but also in terms of affiliations and organizations which influence them or train them, that they're members of. This is cultural and it's organizational. So this could be a cult or religious organization that they belong to, or a mercenary company that they belong to, or a profession that they belong to. The system's default runs from the Bronze Age to the launch of the Industrial Age. It expands from the Industrial Age into the far, far, far future of purely imagined tech, such as that galaxy far, far away. And as such, it can be used to run a desperate and gritty historical game with characters on a cruel coastline fending off an invasion of raiders from the sea, or anything else you can imagine, with one or more or all of its 5 nuanced magical systems. It can go from low fantasy to very high. It can handle games of knights in shining armor or space knights with blazing energy. Veterans of psychic wars or victims of cosmic horror can all be characters, can all play a role, as can ancient peoples and their cultures, or creatures and cultures that you invent whole cloth. As a system, it provides rules for all of these things so that you do not have to. You can identify or create a setting that you wish to use and then rely on Mythras to have the rules needed to support play in that setting. But, as we all know, system matters. You choose Mythras for what you're going to play if you're looking for a game that starts with detailed characters, with connections to their setting and room to grow into it and change it at a pace designed for long-term play. These characters are going to develop, they're going to connect to one another, they're going to connect to the playgroup over a long period of time. You choose Mythras if you enjoy detailed results of skill checks and combat and the description that arises from all of that. You choose Mythras if you enjoy risk in dangerous pursuits and also enjoy quick resolution of that risk. Combat, for example, is dangerous to the character. It invites permanent injury to the character, and it's typically processed in just a few turns of rapid back and forth interactions. Its nature, it alters how people play. It alters when violence seems like an option the characters should take and will take. And this in turn encourages more of the character to appear in play as more options are explored. And all of that creates a greater richness and connection to the setting that you sat down to play in. Examples of the system in play are also included in a playlist in the show notes. Okay, your turn. Those are my 3 choices of systems that I favor for Jason's contest on the Nerds RPG VarietyCast. What are your 3 choices of systems that you've played? Please, go tell Jason. Or you can tell me and I'll tell him that you told me, and, Remember to include why, and remember that these are systems that you've played. If you choose to participate in the contest, you should know it's for charity, and Jason will be providing a prize for the winner and a matching donation for the winner's charity of choice. Or both prizes can go directly to the charity. The contest ends on February 28th at midnight EST. Entries can be made by leaving a voice message on his Anchor podcast, and I'll have a link for that in the show notes, or by contacting him at one of the other means provided, but you'll actually have to go to his homepage for Nerds RPG Variety Cast to get those details. All right. Here endeth episode 3.9 of the Casting Shadows podcast in 2022. How exciting. Casting Shadows began as a blog, a WordPress blog, and you can find it at castingshadowsblog.com. It's also spilled out into YouTube, and you can find it there at youtube.com/Runeslinger, the name under which I talk about all things RPG. And finally, you can find it here, which you've already done. Okay. Until the next time, take care.